How are you, sir? Good morning.
I'm doing just fine. How are you fellas?
Excellent. What do you make of the New York Times just rolling around like a pig in mud with what seems to be glee over the fact that fewer white babies are going to be born than non-white babies for the first time?
Well, as I recall, I was removed from MSNBC for saying the same thing. It's now the lead story in not only the New York Times, but the Washington Post. Minority babies, majority in U.S. USA Today, minorities are now a majority of births. All three newspapers have suddenly awakened to, or at least reported, the demographic statistics that I talked about in my book in the chapter The End of White America that basically got me severed from MSNBC. But I'm glad to see it, candidly, because what they're beginning to talk about is the impact on education, politics, national unity of the demographic decline of the white majority in America. And it's an enormously important subject.
Why is it going to have an impact? Because it would seem that it doesn't make any difference what hue of white, brown, or black somebody's skin is if we all believe in freedom and democracy and free markets. It'll all be fine.
Well, let me take the politics of it. The Democratic Party wins 60 to 70% of the Hispanic vote in virtually every election. It was almost 70% with McCain. They win 60 to 70% of the Asian American vote, and they win 90 to 96% of the African American vote. And Republicans win about 55 to 60% of the white vote. As the white vote shrinks dramatically and these minority votes grow, the natural Democratic constituency grows and grows and grows. Take your own state of California, fellas. I think Reagan won it 4 times, all 4 times he ran. Nixon won it 6 out of 7 times he ran. Republican can't carry California again. We haven't carried it since 1988. California's gone, New York is gone, Illinois is gone, and when Texas goes, you'll never have another Republican president.
Wow. One-party rule hasn't worked out so well out here, Pat. I don't know if you've read any of the headlines.
It's a 16% budget deficit.
Oh, it's disastrous.
Well, this is one of the, and again, you've got to go into economics, where Asian Americans do exceedingly well, do better than any other ethnic group, just about, in terms of academics and in terms of low crime rates and in terms of work ethic and in terms of income. The Hispanic American young population, many of it immigrant population, does not do as well in school and does not do as well economically. And when you get massive welfare states like we have in the United States and you have in California, as that population grows, the deficit for education and welfare grows, and the revenue-producing population leaves the state, and it's unstoppable in California. As someone said, Tom Joad has given up.
Pat Buchanan's on the line.
Why has the Republican Party not been able to get the Hispanic vote or whatever vote? I don't understand why people of any ethnicity vote as a block anyway. I've never quite understood that. Explain what you think is the bottom.
Let's take the African American vote. Begin with. To them, the federal government destroyed the Confederacy. It ended slavery. It imposed desegregation on the southern states through the Supreme Court. Federal government passed the Civil Rights Act, and the federal government enforces affirmative action. And the federal government is the source of an enormous amount of basic benefits. They get free education from the government. All Americans get free education, but you get food stamps there, you get Pell Grants there, you get Head Start there. All of these programs on which minority and poor communities depend. Why should African Americans vote for a party which is seen as anti-government, which is the Republican Party? It seems to me it's quite natural that they would vote for the Democratic Party. And again, when we've dropped half of America from the federal income tax rolls. All right, the folks below the middle line then, and minorities, especially Hispanic and African American minorities, tend to be below that middle line. A majority are. And why should they vote for a government which is going to or for a party which is going to cut their benefits and maybe cut taxes which they don't pay anyhow? Why?
Pat's latest book, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive to 2025? Washington Times said it's the political book of the year, maybe of our time. You look to Greece, though, Pat. You're talking about the voting trends and the reasons
Right.
for them. And at the point of, days away from disaster, the people of Greece still would not come together and say, okay, enough is enough. They want to keep the gravy train a-rolling.
Well, the people of Greece, what they have, this is what you're looking at, fellas, is a deficiency of democracy. Now, the Greeks have been, they got into the EU. They borrowed all that money at very low rates. They had a gigantic party there. They have retirement at 60 and all of these benefits they voted. And they've got them all there on the books. And in the last 2 years, they've been paring them back dramatically, cutting them and chopping them. And it's quite clear that the society can't stand the pain, and when they go to the polls, they will throw out people who impose the pain. At the same time, they say they want to stay in the euro. Now, you can't have both. And so I think what's going to happen is they're going to vote this Syriza party into power in June, or as the top party, and they're simply not going to pay. And what they're saying to the EU is either you're going to bail us out or we're just not paying. And again, there's a failure of democracy. The whole democratic system in Europe is on the line. And you're exactly right. They're going to have to go through the pain one way or the other. You can't avoid it.
We're talking with Pat Buchanan, and getting back to this, because it's a big news story today that the white babies for the first time are going to be under 50%, so a minority. I was looking at the chart in the New York Times and how non-white babies, the growth is, it's on a line, and the percentage of black people in America has stayed around the same for years and years and years,
right.
but the Hispanic has grown a lot because we allow illegal immigration with no limits whatsoever, or have for years. But the percentage of white babies being born is dropping off a cliff, and a lot of it is just white people don't have kids. Now, that's a cultural thing among white people that we've talked about a lot, and it's kind of difficult. Living out here in San Francisco, I know so many people that are white that they don't want to have kids. They want to travel. They want to eat out. What do you do about that weird cultural thing?
Well, people have asked me that question, and I say, look, Pat Buchanan doesn't have an answer to that question. You need a St. Paul to do that. It's a very good question. It goes right to the heart of my book. That there is a great shift morally, culturally, and religiously in America. We used to be, when I grew up, my mom had 9 kids. We used to be a family-centered society, and now we're an individual-centered society, and you're exactly right. As they say in Europe, there are more dogs on the streets than there are children. And what's happened to Western civilization is it has embraced a culture, if you will, la dolce vita, or the me generation, call it what you want. But again, I really credit you for looking at the right figure there. Births among minorities dropped, but births among whites in 1 year dropped 10%. So what you have is a people who are not reproducing themselves. Now, this is true. I've got a chapter in my book called Demographic Winter. Every single country in Europe, not one of them among its native-born, has a birth rate that will enable it to survive through this century. Couple of numbers. Russia, just Russians, lost 10 million people since liberation, if you will, in 1990. They will lose 25 million Russians between now and 2050. The Japanese will lose 25 million people. The Germans will lose 8 million. Every new generation of Italians is 1/3 smaller than the previous generation.
Wow.
Well, look at their statistics. What you need is 2.1 children per woman to maintain an existing population. The Italian figure is 1.4, which is 2/3 of that. So you get 1/3 of each new generation's 1/3 smaller than one before it. What's going to happen by the end of this century, you and I aren't going to be here, but all these countries are going to be depopulated. Ukraine's going to lose 20 million people. And what's going to happen is the Muslim populations, which are growing rapidly, will come across the Med and repopulate these countries. And with the United States, it's the Hispanic folks, mainly Mexicans, coming across the border to the good life. They work hard. They like what they got here. It's much better than what they got home. I understand that. They got not just the benefits, social welfare benefits, but you get a job, you get 6, 7, 8, 9, $10 an hour. You work 10, 11 hours a day. It's a good life. And so what's happening is you're replacing an existing population with a new population. The white race, if you call it a race, or the Caucasian race or European peoples, are everywhere dying.
Pat Buchanan, his latest book, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive to 2025? Pat, can you hang around for just a couple more minutes?
Sure, delighted.
Love to talk more about the book, and if there's anything... Well, my question is, who cares? As Jack has pointed out, skin tone, who cares? I don't care. Culturally, cultural norms, the ways of seeing the government, the ways of seeing people, our responsibilities to each other. What's the significance there? Demographic change.
Pat Buchanan got fired off MSNBC after years of being on there for talking what he just talked, by the way. Stay with us. You're listening to the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Clark Howard, 10 till noon. This is Talk 650 KSTE.
This is the Armstrong and Getty Show. I'm Jack Armstrong, and he's Joe Getty. It's a big headline, partially because the New York Times sets the tone for what news is going to be talked about every day. They just do. It's been that way for years. And they're so enthusiastic about white people no longer being in charge, as they see it, that they're very excited about this new demographic news that there are going to be less than 50% white babies born right now. There are now more non-white babies born than white babies, and somehow this is supposed to be good news. I'm not saying it's bad news, but I don't understand how you're so excited that it's automatically good news.
Pat Buchanan joins us. Suicide of a Superpower is Pat's latest book, Will America Survive to 2025, which is all about these demographic questions, which, well, demographic moves, floods that really can't be resisted, but ought to be recognized. Pat, thanks for hanging around. We truly do appreciate it.
Delighted, fellas.
Where does that enthusiasm come from? I've been trying to dig it up. There was an opinion piece in the New York Times a couple of years ago when this story was out, one of these kinds of stories. And the guy wrote, "I'm so excited that I'm going to live to see the day." And this is a white guy. "I'm going to live to see the day when whites are no longer the majority." And I don't quite get that mindset.
Well, let me give you a term I put in my book that has not been too widely quoted. It's called ethnomasochism. And it's a sense of people who are delighted at the failures of their own country, at their own society. It was prevalent in Great Britain, where a lot of Brits and the upper elites and things, some of them went communist and became treasonist. Others were delighted with the collapse of the empire. And I think this it didn't exist in this country under, obviously, Andrew Jackson or Dwight Eisenhower or folks like that, but it's very true now. Let's take Michael Moore. What is his title of his book? Stupid White Men. Now, if you wrote a book about another minority and put them in there, you'd probably be in the same place I am with MSNBC. But so you can't do it, but you can. There's nothing wrong. Everybody now they mock and ridicule, and I've got all of this is written in the book. Jon Stewart, even in some of these others, it's very funny to make fun of white folks. And it's very acceptable, and there is a real sense that whites. Susan Sontag was a perfect example of it. She said, the white race is the cancer of human history. That's an extreme example of it. But Ann Dunham, Barack Obama's mom, I've got her quoted in my book. I got it from another fellow, John Derbyshire, and he read the book, and she was married to the Indonesian fellow, and he was saying, look, you got these American businessmen over here, and I got to entertain them, and I need somebody to talk to them. These are your people. And she said, they are not my people. Mm. And so you got that attitude. It's prevalent in the New York Times. There's a real sense of elation, I think, frankly, that the white community, European peoples who dominated and ruled the world by all those empires up until around, certainly till before World War I, and after World War I, it was the Germans and the Italians lost their empires, or the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. But there has been elation with the decline of the West. And the book I wrote 10 years ago, Death of the West, people said, why should we be worried about that? Western civilization, in my view, is the greatest civilization the world has ever seen, far and away.
Well, we're in the capital of this sort of thing in San Francisco, Berkeley, Davis, et cetera. There seems to be this childlike elation, as you put it, a pride in saying, I am against power, therefore I am enlightened, and I am smarter and more evolved than you. But it's so poorly thought out and so knee-jerk, it's frustrating.
It's unthinking. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
It's what we've got is, I think you got generations which are indoctrinated in these ideas that have come up. I mean, Bill Clinton went out and spoke at Portland State, and in 1997 or 98, I believe it was, and he said, by 2050, and now of course the date's been moved up to 2041, there'll be no racial majority in the United States, and all these white kids got up and cheered. Now, if you told folks in Washington, D.C., there's white folks moving into Washington, D.C., and I've seen there have been African-American leaders who say we're going to lose our city. We're going to lose our city. We got the politics here. We're dominant politically and culture, all the rest of these things. And they have a real sense of ethnic identity and ethnic pride. People do all over the world, you guys. Again, I had a chapter which was titled Ethno-Nationalism, and I changed the title to Triumph of Tribalism. All over the world, you see people identifying by their tribe or their race, and they're trying to put together nations of their own. In Baluchistan, in Kurdistan, in Pashtunistan, in Chechnya, in Dagestan, Ingushetia, all these people are identifying with themselves, their culture, their people. I think it's produced some terrible consequences, but it is natural and normal with human beings to identify with their fellows, with their family, their community, their cousins, their country. And we are losing that, and when you lose that, you're going to lose your country.
Well, what really bothers me is that if people don't get beyond that knee-jerk thinking, they don't recognize that the European culture is the culture of the Magna Carta, the Constitution, the common law, the rights of Englishmen, blah, 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 whereas a lot of other cultures are the cultures of dictatorship and a disgusting, by my view, relationship between the people and those who rule them. And they don't understand that will change the nature of our relationship to the government.
Well, it's not only, it's not simply and here's one of the arguments that I'm known as a paleoconservative, as opposed to the neoconservatives who say many of them say America is basically an idea. It's an abstract idea. And I say no. And folks who agree with me say no. We were a nation. We were a people before we signed a constitution. The Constitution was the birth certificate that we all signed, but we already existed as a consequence of Lexington and Concord and the Stamp Act and all of these things. They created a new, different, independent people. Yeah, the Brits were our cousins, but we were a new people. And this idea that a new people has arisen. I know this is going to be very controversial, but it's the point at which I felt that there ought to be a Palestinian state was after the first Intifada, when these people rose up, they're throwing sticks and stones and rocks, they're getting shot down, and you said, look, they may not have been a people, or they may have been what Newt said and invented people, but now they are acting as a people. And when you have one culture, as Abba Eban said, if you have two cultures, two languages, two religions, two peoples, you need two states. And this is my belief about these things. And that's one of the theses of this book. But if you go outside the United States, around the world, look at Scotland wants to break away from England. Catalonia wants to break away from Spain. The Northern League wants to break away from Italy. You get not only in Europe, you go to anywhere. Kurdistan wants to break away from Iraq.
Right.
All over the world. Even you look at the Chinese, they're aware of these things. The Uyghurs out there are being persecuted in western China because they want to break away Xinjiang province and turn it into East Turkestan.
I'm afraid we're out of time, Pat.
Pat, yeah, I'm afraid we're out of time. Final question, though, very short. Why is nobody watching CNN anymore? Is it Wolf Blitzer?
It's 18 hours of Wolf a day.
You know what?
I like Wolf. He's a friend of mine. Look, I used to work with Wolf in the first days of CNN. It was a great place.
I remember it.
Are you pissed off that MSNBC let you go the way they did?
No, I'm not. I mean, look, I had 10 years. I liked the people over there. I enjoyed it. It's longer than I've worked anywhere, and I haven't survived anywhere for 10 years, you guys.
Yeah, that's a decent point.
Pat Buchanan, his book, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive to 2025? Pat, it's always a great pleasure. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you.